Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Big Tent. We're a nonpartisan, women-led community dedicated to building a pro-democracy coalition. We put democracy above partisanship, and we welcome people of all levels of experience in civic engagement to join us as we work to strengthen our democracy. And of course, we'd love for you to spread the word. Civic engagement needs to be an ongoing effort. It's not a one-off. And I actually believe all of this civic engagement can not only be fun, dare I say, but also can be really great for community building. So ask your friends, your family, your neighbors to join you in these efforts, make it more fun, and that'll help you to just keep going until November and beyond. So today is a really big day. We are initiating officially our partnership with Vote Forward, which is a 501c. It's a nonprofit organization that empowers grassroots volunteers to send handwritten letters encouraging fellow Americans to vote. Simple and very effective work. We're joined today by three powerful change makers from Vote Forward, who will tell us a bit about the organization, its impact, and how letter writing process works. And I have the privilege of introducing one of these amazing women, and then she will introduce the other two. So welcome to Catherine, Emily, and Nia. Thank you for being here. I'm going to introduce Catherine first. Catherine Vaughan has built a career building, leading, and advising mission-driven organizations. She got her strategic training at McKinsey & Company, and she uses that knowledge to help nonprofits such as Partners in Health and Teach for America. In 2016, Catherine founded Flippable, an organization focused on electing Democrats in state legislative races as a way to protect everything from voting rights to redistricting. In 2019, Flippable merged with Swing Left, a Democratic organization that mobilizes donors and activists in critical elections. And Catherine served as co-executive director, and she built the organization's strategic plan and oversaw programs that raised $25 million and mobilized over 35 million voter contacts for the 2020 election. Currently, Catherine's the interim executive director of Vote Forward. She serves on the board of Swing Left and is a senior advisor to One for Democracy. Welcome, Catherine. Thank you for being here. And I'll now hand the program over to you. Thank you so much.
Mary, thank you so much for the kind introduction. And thank you to the whole Big Tent team for this amazing partnership, and just for everyone on this call for your interest in our work, for being volunteers, for writing letters, for being an amazing women-led movement. I'm so inspired by this community, and it's been great to get to know you all a little better. My name is Catherine Vaughan, and I'm here because I have the honor of filling some very big shoes. So our executive director, Yasmin Raji, is out on parental leave for a few months. And as a board member and a former member of leadership at Swing Left and Vote Forward, I was asked to fill in. I'm thrilled to get to jump back into this work during what is such a critical election year. I know it feels like we say that every election, but I'm really feeling it right now. And to get to be more than just a cheerleader on the sidelines during the election year for Vote Forward. But you're not going to miss the real thing. So we're working with Big Tent to schedule another Tent Talk where Yasmin, who is just an incredible leader, can speak to your group. So I'm just a warm-up act for Yasmin, who will be back in May, and also today for our incredible full-time team members, who you'll hear from shortly and who can give you lots more details about the day-to-day. Mary gave a great introduction of how I came to get to know Vote Forward. So I will skip over all of my bio, but maybe just as I'm sure a lot of you can relate to. So I worked on the Hillary campaign in 2016. And the day after the election, I was one of many, many, many people across the country who wanted to do something to protect and rebuild our democracy. And I remember at that time, it was such an incredible moment. There was a call that Barack Obama had with people in his administration, people who had worked on his campaigns, people who had worked on the Hillary campaign, and everyone wanted to do something about our democracy. And he said, "Let 1,000 flowers bloom." And so at that time, and I'm sure that some of those flowers are in this room today, everyone was kind of starting their own efforts And over time, those efforts were really paying off. We saw a surge in turnout, especially among younger voters, driven by the volunteer work that so many people were doing. And over time, we started to coordinate more and more so that we could really maximize our collective impact. And so my organization, Flippable, merged with Swing Left in 2019. And right around the same time, Vote Forward started an official kind of affiliation with Swing Left. And I should note, I was going to preface this, my background is in democratic politics, but I have my nonpartisan C4 hat on with Vote Forward today. So Vote Forward and Swing Left started this partnership. And that's what really introduced me to this amazing organization. I got to meet Scott Foreman, who had started Vote Forward at his kitchen table, writing letters to voters one by one in the Alabama Senate special election in 2017. And it really felt like this meeting of minds. Scott had this ethos of rolling up his sleeves to do the work. No task was beneath him, including writing thousands of letters to voters. And then he was also extremely rigorous as a data scientist who wanted to measure his impact with precision and to continually improve the model. And as happens with a lot of organizations, I think that ethos really became such a core part of Vote Forward's DNA. And so even though Scott has moved on from leadership and I've moved on from leadership, we're both on the board, these qualities really persist throughout the organization. And I'm just so impressed with how the staff has carried on this vision and made it better and better over time. So I want to call out a few things that I think are really special about Vote Forward. First is this culture of measurement, experimentation, and innovation. So when Scott was writing those thousands of letters at his kitchen table, he was structuring it as a randomized control trial, or RCT, so that he could measure and actually, take a look at who actually did vote as a result of these letters compared to a randomized sample that didn't get the letters. And it turned out that those handwritten letters had a really significant impact on turnout in Alabama. So he and we as Vote Forward kept doing more RCTs in election after election to measure both the baseline impact of our letter writing intervention and to measure the impact of other modifications to the model so that we could always kind of test new things and integrate them. And Emily will talk about some specific things that we've tested a bit later. But we really test everything we do, and we use the results of those experiments, whether they're positive, strongly, with strong statistical significance, whether they're directional or null, to modify and improve our programs over time. Another thing that I think is great about Vote Forward is our ability to kind of seize the moment. So in 2020, when it became clear that we had a pandemic on our hands and people needed to stay home, our tactic of handwritten letters was an indispensable tool for anyone who wanted to help turn out the vote safely. And Vote Forward's community sent over 20 million letters in 2020, hosting countless virtual events to help build a sense of camaraderie when we all had to be social distancing. And I know for me, attending those virtual letter writing parties was a way to feel connected to other people during a time when otherwise I would have felt extremely isolated. And I'm sure many people in this room can relate to that as well. Which brings me to our volunteer community, which is just this amazing group of people across the country, including the folks in the Zoom room, with a truly shared sense of purpose. And what I love about our volunteer groups is that they've built this organizing muscle. They've built leadership skills over time that really persist from one election to the next. And that's really what I see as the enduring impact of our work. It's not just about who turns out in a given election, but about the habits that we build in community, one election after another. And then, of course, this community has enabled us to achieve incredible scale, including sending over 30 million letters since 2017. Emily, I think there's a slide on, I don't know if it's that important. I think it just has a picture, but I think maybe the next one or one after that. Here's some examples of volunteers about to send their letters. So what is the Big Send? So each election cycle, we launch a campaign called the Big Send to turbocharge and really kickstart our community's efforts. We know a lot of people have been writing letters throughout, but this is a time to really celebrate and get lots of groups around the country to kick things off. So we launched the Big Send 2024 last Wednesday, and in the 6 days since, over 300,000 letters have been adopted. That number's probably low, but I checked it a couple hours ago. And our goal this year is to send 10 million letters. Who are we writing letters to? So if we think about kind of what is our sweet spot, We want to send letters to voters that are most likely to be influenced by a handwritten letter. So if it's a voter who votes in every single election without fail, that's not an ideal target for us because they're going to vote anyway. If it's someone who never votes, obviously we really hope that something will get them to vote, but they might not be an ideal kind of low-hanging fruit target either, because they haven't responded to various interventions. But that sweet spot is people who have voted sporadically, who have voted in some elections but not others, and where a little nudge might make the difference. And so this year we are writing to what we call surge voters, which we define as people who didn't vote in the 2016 election, but who have voted in at least one election since. And many of these voters are young. Some are too young to have voted in 2016, and about a third are voters of color. I think Nia or Emily might get into this more deeply, so I will just go over it quickly. But we have two types of campaigns. We have 501c3 and 501c4 campaigns. And this basically pertains to the degree of how political we can be in our targeting and messaging. So our C3 campaigns don't use things like partisanship scores to identify and target voters. We define our C3 universe as surge voters who are under 35. And for our C4 universe, we can integrate a little bit more information to target, likely Democratic voters. These voters live in lots of different states. We're currently focused on 8, which are New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, and Arizona. But we do anticipate adding more geographies over time. This is just our current universe. And when will we send letters? So we will send these letters in late October. And the beautiful thing about letter writing is that you can do it all year. And so you can write letters all year and then send them all at the same time for maximum impact when the election is top of mind for people. And that's something you can't do with other forms of voter contact, like door knocks or phone calls. It doesn't hurt to contact voters earlier in the year, but you can't stockpile door knocks the same way that you can write letters early and stockpile them and send them all on a given date. So it's just a really effective and efficient thing to be doing early in the year. And I am going to pass it off to Nia Bentall, our amazing mobilization lead, to walk us through the nuts and bolts of how to write an effective letter.
Thank you, Catherine. Hi, everyone. My name is Nia. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Director of Mobilization here at Vote Forward, and I'm so excited to be with you all today. I'm going to talk a little bit about what our letters actually look like, and then spend most of my time talking about how to craft an effective message in the handwritten portion of your letter. That way we can all write our letters, then while we listen to Emily, talk about the impact of our letters and how we measure that impact. So what do our letters look like? The letter is a form letter customized for each voter. It has the voter's name at the bottom, and the letters are then personalized by volunteers, which is the secret sauce in making them effective. And we are writing these letters now, holding on to them, and then mailing them anytime between October 1 and October 29 this year. And our letters are nonpartisan, which means we don't mention parties or candidates by name in our messages. Okay, so a few other points. We ask that all our volunteers please write them in English, as we don't have a way of knowing the preferred language of the recipient. And print is recommended. It's just a little easier to read for most. At the bottom of the letter, you'll find the name and address of the person we are writing the letter for. So when you put the letters in an envelope, please make sure that the name and address at the bottom match what you're writing on the front of the envelope. We recommend signing with your first name and last initial, that you can do what you're comfortable with. And for the return address, please put your name, last initial, and write Vote Forward underneath. But now onto the most common question that letter writers ask, which is, what should I write? So today we're going to share some tips for crafting a personal story based on what's proven to be effective. So generally, messages that are positive, heartfelt and personal, and nonpartisan work best. So why positive? We say positive not to dismiss the real challenges in our world, but rather to focus on voting as a positive, meaningful experience. Messages that generate excitement about voting help motivate letter recipients to cast a ballot. And we want to avoid messages that highlight the consequences of not voting, because fear isn't inhibiting emotion. It tells us to avoid something rather than take action. So it can actually be counterproductive to our goal of encouraging the letter recipient to vote. Overall, our letters should focus on the hope of what's possible for all of us when we participate in the democratic process, and not the fear of what can happen if we don't. Why heartfelt and personal? In 2021, our team conducted an experiment, as we tend to do, as part of our Vote Forward Labs initiative. And we learned that letters with a personal story message may be especially motivating for voters. A personal story message is short, 1 to 3 sentences about a personal experience, either from you or someone you know, showing how voting affects real people's lives. And why nonpartisan? So Get Out the Vote research has shown that nonpartisan messaging is actually more effective than partisan messaging for boosting voter turnout. And that said, we ask that our volunteers don't mention candidates by name, mention political parties, or assume that the recipient agrees on very specific issues or policies. It's fine to mention issues that really matter to you, especially within the context of a personal story. Just be careful not to assume the recipient agrees with your specific policy preference. So you want to stay away from mentioning a bill that you think Congress should pass, but you're welcome to talk about the issue. And overall, you want to remember that you're writing to voters who have a different perspective than you, but even if they live in a different community or care about different issues, they can still relate to the emotions and the values that you bring up in your personal story, which is why we think they're so effective. Next slide, please. So how to build that 1 to 3 sentence personal story. The form letter includes an opening line, letting the recipient know how important this election is, and a closing line asking them to join you in being a voter. And your role is to insert that short story into the body of the letter. And we want those messages to be specific, authentic, and compelling. Some examples. Your portion of the letter will start with, I vote because. There is so much at stake in 2024 that you could answer this question in any number of ways. But remembering what kinds of letters are the most effective. So the first example we have here is, democracy works best when we all participate and make our voices heard. This is a really great reason for voting, and it's well said. But it's not particularly specific, not enough detail to really seem authentic or to be super compelling compared to the other messages the reader might have already heard. So we could build on that to say, if I don't vote, I'm letting others decide who will represent my community and what kind of policies they'll pass or block that affects our lives. This one makes the connection between civic participation and everyday life. And it hits the criteria a little bit more, but we can get a little more personal. So you can say something like, I vote because as someone with a pre-existing condition, I want to ensure I elect representatives who protect my access to affordable healthcare. I think this one is more compelling. It has the personal story element, but we can really make the connection to voting. Next example, please. So this one says, I vote because I've had asthma since I was a kid, and I know that if I'm ever between jobs, I'll only be able to get insurance because the law protects people like me with pre-existing conditions. I want to elect candidates who support these policies that have been important to me and so many of my loved ones. With this example, we have an authentic personal story that goes a little deeper into the specifics of why voting affected the writer, which makes it naturally more compelling. So you can see how all these messages are true and important, but building your personal story can really help you hit the mark. In the last example, you can feel the worry about keeping insurance, and even if the reader hasn't had to worry about insurance specifically, surely they've had to worry about something. So you're more likely to resonate with the reader and really help them make that connection to voting. Next slide, please. So how do you get to specific, authentic, and compelling? You want to start by thinking about a specific way that voting has affected your life or the life of someone close to you. So first, think of a person, maybe it's you, who had an experience, a challenge, a hope for the future, a memory of participating in democracy. And then you'll think about how you were feeling in that situation. We're going to share a few examples that we've gotten from staff and letter writers at events in the past. And then we'll share a bunch of prompts to help get us thinking about our own stories. So in this first example, we have a letter writer whose neighborhood is impacted by California wildfires. Next slide, please. So who is that person? My neighbors and myself. What is that person experiencing? The challenge of increasingly dangerous wildfires close to home. And how does you or that person feel about that situation? There's fear for safety and health, sense of community, gratitude for local elected representatives who care. And then how might voting affect the situation? Elected representatives can continue to make progress. So when we put all of that together, our first example is, I vote because living in California, wildfires have been getting worse, and sometimes my neighbors and I can't even leave our houses because the air is so thick with smoke. I'm proud to see that my elected representatives in Congress are taking action against climate-related disasters. In our second example, the writer and his wife just had their first baby. So going through all these different questions, you know, who's the person, what are they experiencing, how do they feel about the situation, and then voting is how we kind of can break down putting this big life situation into a compelling 1 to 3 sentence story. Next slide, please. So this second example says, I believe voting matters because in the operating room after my son was born, his mom and I promised him that we'd do everything we could to build a better world for him. His generation faces so many challenges, from school shootings to a deeply divided society. I vote to keep my promise to our son that we'll elect leaders who will build a better world for him to grow up in. So now we're going to spend a couple minutes thinking about what we might write about. So if you remember from the examples, you can think about your own life, the people you know and care about, and then specifically think about how voting impacts you and the challenges you face. These prompts are here to help jog your memory for a story you could write about. You're not going to answer all of these questions. You only need 1 to 3 sentences, so it's not your full life story. But think of one specific moment to write about. And we're going to take a couple minutes to brainstorm. And if anybody has been working on their messages, I'd love if you could share in the chat. That's often my favorite part of these letter writing events, when we share our messages with each other. Kitty says, I always bring up my children and their future. Absolutely. That's one of our most kind of popular messages. Let's see. Aaron says, I vote because I hate that my 8-year-old grandson has to have active shooter drills at his school. I vote for people who pledge to take action about the epidemic of gun violence in our country. Absolutely. That's a really powerful message, Aaron. Steve says, I want my daughter to be allowed to make her own healthcare decisions. Absolutely. That's a big theme as well. Bernetta says, I vote because my ancestors fought for the right to vote and have their voices heard. Please join me. Yes. These are all really powerful messages, right? We'll continue to share the messages that you're going to write in the chat. And while you do that, I'm actually going to pass it over to my colleague, Emily, who is Vote Forward's Director of Data and Research, to talk to us about the impact of our letters. So Emily, over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Nia. And hi, everyone. I'm Emily. Nice to meet you. As Nia so nicely introduced me, I am the Director of Data and Research here at Vote Forward. And as Catherine mentioned in her great introduction, data and research is something that's been important to us at Vote Forward since the very beginning. We really do see this as part of our DNA as an organization. And that's why I was brought on in 2020 to continue to build out that effort that our founder, Scott, had started, make it even bigger, and run experiments that actually develop our program into something more effective over time, which I think this training that Nia just ran is a great example of that. This came out of an experiment that we conducted in 2021, showing that personal stories like this, not only do we believe, based on the wisdom of people who have lots of organizing experience, that stories like this are effective, but we can actually see in the data that those messages on average outperformed a more general messaging approach. So I'm here to speak to you on behalf of the research team and to tell you a little bit about the research that we've done to date and how it shows that these letters are effective. I know that some of you may be still thinking about your personal stories. You may be actually writing letters. You might be figuring out how to download letters or print them or do something else like that. That's great. Feel free to continue doing those things while I talk. I will be presenting here in the background for those of you who want to listen or watch, but we are also recording this presentation. So if you feel like you missed something, don't worry, it'll be here for you. I'll also just remind us that there will be a Q&A section at the end. So if you find a question coming up during this part, or if you had a question from earlier, that's great. You can go ahead and post it in the chat and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can at the end. I know that during the data section, a lot of questions tend to come up. And so please don't hesitate to ask any questions. We have the whole range of folks, from people who have never heard of this kind of experimentation to people who have done this professionally in their lives. And so regardless of where you fall on that spectrum, you're welcome here and your questions are welcome. Okay, so the first thing that I want to call out here is that when you're writing letters, you are part of a really huge effort. Just last year in 2023, which is an off year from the standard of, political campaigns, we sent over 1 million letters for various elections in Wisconsin, Ohio, and Virginia. And that's just a small piece of all of the letters that we've sent over time. To date, we've sent more than 30 million letters since Vote Forward was founded in 2017 across many elections, including the 2020 presidential, the 2022 midterms, and a whole host of state and congressional district and special elections in between. What's also really cool is that most of these letters were sent as part of experimental campaigns where we measured the impact of those letters. And I'm going to talk to you about how we do that. We have tested our letters multiple times over the past 6 years. Like I said, the majority of those 30 million letters were part of some sort of test. And we have measured a positive impact nearly every time that we look for impacts on turnout. But beyond just measuring impact and to show us that this does work, we've also been conducting and sharing numerous other kinds of experiments to push the boundaries of what letters can do. So we test different types of outcome, we test different designs, and we test different aspects of our program so that we're always evolving towards more impact over time. Again, I think the personal story training that we just experienced from Nia was a great example of how we took something we learned from an experiment and translated it into a better way to run our program. So basically, we never think that we're done. We never think we have the perfect solution. We always keep testing to improve more and more over time. So how do we do that? This is just the really, really quick summary. And so I know if this is an unfamiliar concept to you, it might feel like a lot, but don't worry. Like I said, we have a Q&A, so I'm happy to take more questions about it. The essence here is that we run something called randomized controlled trials with our letters, or RCTs. And the basic concept is that we compare an outcome, usually voter turnout, across groups of voters who are similar in every way, except some of them receive our letters and some don't. And we randomly assign voters to receive letters. So that's how we know that these groups are similar, right? After the letter campaign, we receive data on which of those voters turn out. And so because we've randomly assigned those voters into groups, we can be very sure that whatever difference we see in their outcomes was actually due to the Vote Forward letters and not something else. This is considered to be the gold standard of how to measure program impact. And we take a lot of pride in that. I know it's something that can be pretty intensive. It takes time, it takes effort to do these things. But we think that it's really worth it in order to measure how well these campaigns are working. I want to highlight just a few of our most recent research findings. This isn't even like the full extent of what we tested in 2022 and 2023, let alone the full extent of what we've tested to date. But I'm highlighting a few here that I think are really exciting because they point the way towards what we're going to be doing this year. So those three are testing letters for voter registration, letters that include candidate or ballot information in the text of the letter, and including items inside envelopes along with your letters. On the first one, voter registration. So in 2022, in the midterms, we conducted an experiment with the DNC in Arizona that showed our first solid evidence for our letters' impact on voter registration. And this was sort of like a white whale for us. This is something we had been trying to pursue over multiple experiments and had just not quite figured out how to make it work. But in 2022, we saw the first experimental evidence that this was working. And even more exciting was that our letters in 2022 affected registration rates over and above several waves of direct mail. So we were not only showing that these letters worked for registration, but they gave us an extra boost even beyond what was already happening, which was really exciting to see. And so the upshot of that is we want to do more voter registration work this year. We're working on designing those campaigns right now. And so we hope to be able to offer that to you soon. And if that's something that really motivates you, I know we get a lot of people coming to us who are passionate about expanding the electorate like this. We're going to be offering you a way to do that where you can stockpile and send your letters early in the year, just like how we do for voter turnout. We're also excited about testing letters as part of voter contact programs. We definitely don't think that we have the one silver bullet or that anybody does, but when we can combine effective tactics like this into programs with other modalities, we're making sure to reach voters in all the different ways that they might be influenced and raise the likelihood that we're going to catch everybody and bring them in. The second experiment theme that I want to talk to you about is including more information about the things that are on voters' ballots. So sometimes candidates and then sometimes ballot initiatives. So also in 2022, we ran another experiment. This one was focused on Nevada's Secretary of State race. And those letters showed promising effects on both turnout and candidate performance in that race. So this was under our political letter program where we are allowed to push a little further in the direction of influencing partisan outcomes and targeting voters based on partisanship. But I'll remind you that in general, our letters are typically nonpartisan. Last year, we also continued to build on that result by including little candidate comparisons in our Wisconsin 2023 Supreme Court race letters. That was one where we thought that both the candidates, Janet Protasiewicz and her challenger, we thought that they were going to have low name ID with voters. And so we thought it was very important for voters to even just know who is going to be on their ballot. We also did letters focused on Ohio's Reproductive Freedom Ballot Initiative, and this was also structured as an RCT. We're still waiting for the results from that, but we're hoping to get those in soon. And again, that was one where we thought it was really important for voters to have information besides the call to action. We know based on others' research that one of the big reasons that non-voters don't show up to vote is that they feel underinformed about what's on their ballot. They think, they know if they have not done their research, they know if they feel like they don't know who the candidates are or the issues, they feel like they don't want to cast an underinformed vote, and so they don't show up at all. And we hope that by providing them a little bit of information, we empower them both to seek out more information for themselves, but then also have them feel like they're actually ready to go out and vote. So the upshot of this, letters may influence both voter turnout and vote choice, which is an exciting direction to continue pushing in the future. And we want to keep experimenting with informing voters as well as motivating them. So in our 2024 letters, we actually include 2 links instead of just one, with 2 different QR codes. So you'll see that when you have your letters. And one of those links points voters to a website where they can access comprehensive nonpartisan information about what's on their ballot. Again, this is us trying to use the space in our letters to help voters feel informed, and then hopefully also motivated to vote. So the last bit of experimentation from our recent research program I'll talk to you about is letters with what I'm sort of broadly terming extras. So the experiment that we ran in 2022 around this was pretty small, but it was very promising. It showed evidence that including small items like a magnet or a sticky note inside letters, I should say with letters inside the envelope, may make those turnout letters even more effective. We also know, just based on what we hear from letter writers, that many people already choose to add extras to their letters. They might add stickers on the outside of the envelope. They might highlight the letter. Some people really go all out and, draw pictures. Some people do calligraphy on their envelopes. We see all sorts of creative stuff. And in the vein of letting 1,000 flowers bloom, we really want to actually encourage this rather than, enforcing a very minimalist approach. But we also want to do this in a way that's both supportive and sort of guided so that it's not a complete free-for-all. So we're figuring out ways to support enhancing your letters like this as part of our 2024 program. We think that it's worth it because even if it makes each letter a little bit more time intensive to create, we have some experimental evidence that they may make it more effective. And we think that this election cycle is so important that it's worth really going all out and putting anything in there that we think is going to make the letters more effective. So I want to zoom out now from talking about our 2022 and 2023 results specifically and talk about where we see the impact of letters. Because we really see them as part of a toolbox. And as volunteers, as activists, we use all sorts of different tools in the toolbox, right? So on the one end, we see things that tend to be lower effort, easier to do, and we also tend to see smaller measured effect sizes in general. So like phone banking and texting are examples of this, and I'm sure many of you plan to do some of this. It's not that there's no evidence for the effectiveness of these tactics, but they tend to be smaller. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have things that are much higher effort. I would say probably in-person canvassing is the highest effort thing that you can do, but they also show the highest effects recorded in the literature. So if you can, get out there and go knocking on doors this year, that is something that we know has proven effectiveness. But of course, you have to leave your house. You have to go to a place where there's a race that you want to affect. You need to get the materials, right? You need to be trained or train other organizers. It's very effortful. And so where we see letters fitting in is as this sort of middle ground sweet spot where we have this demonstrated track record of effectiveness, but it's also something that you can do from home. You don't have to go somewhere else. As long as you have a printer or somebody that has a printer, you can print them out and do them whenever you have a free moment. You can also stockpile them throughout the year. So one thing that we like to encourage is, earlier in the year, you can already get started with creating these letters and stockpiling them. And then the closer that we get to the election, if you want to start phone banking or canvassing, that's a great way to sort of diversify your efforts over the course of the year. But we also find that many people, for different reasons, can't participate in different types of activism. So, for example, we hear from a lot of folks who are really busy. Maybe they have demanding jobs, small children, other responsibilities, and they're not going to be able to take a whole day off and go canvassing, but they can sit down after dinner and write a letter or two. And we think that it's great to be able to offer something effective if that's the situation you're in. I also want to talk about effectiveness sort of at scale here. And as I mentioned, again, we want to write 10 million letters this year. We've written 30 million plus to date. And what that means is that even if measured effect sizes are small, they can have huge implications for what actually happens in the world. So for example, here, a 0.5 point of impact in an election where we contact 10 million voters, that translates to 50,000 votes. And that's actually a lot of votes. I have the 2020 presidential election results in Georgia here just to illustrate maybe a very familiar example of how a pretty small number of votes in a particular place can have a huge impact on what happens in the world. So regardless of what you think about the outcome of that particular race and that election, I think it illustrates very clearly that in close elections, all of these votes do matter. And in 2024, we are tightly focused on boosting turnout in these places where we expect there to be close elections. And so we expect those to be the places where every marginal vote has the highest leverage and where it's extra important to make sure that everybody's voice is heard. And then thinking also maybe at like the broadest level about voting over time and our activism over time, we really see this effort as part of building a culture of democracy, both for ourselves and for the people that we're contacting. We know that democracy is threatened here in the US as well as abroad. And so it's more important than ever to build a lasting culture of democratic participation. There's research showing that when you encourage somebody to vote, they are actually more likely to continue voting in future elections. That's part of the reason that we're really excited this year about targeting these surge voters, as Catherine called them. These are folks who have started to show interest and motivation to participate in elections recently, but they are not habitual voters. They may not show up this year. And there's some risk that if they don't continue to show up this year, maybe that's going to be the habit that they reinforce for the rest of their lives. On the other hand, we would expect that those who do show up this year will be more likely to become habitual voters. They'll probably show up for the next presidential election. And maybe we can even get them to start voting in midterms and state elections and local elections, right? Maybe this is their gateway drug, as you say, to greater civic participation. And so we really see this as part of a bigger culture building effort, not just to have impact in this election, but to impact the state of our democracy for years to come. So I'll stop talking there and just say thank you both to my two co-presenters and to all of you and the hosts who invited us here, as well as all of you who are busy writing letters and doing other meaningful forms of civic engagement. If there are questions, you can go ahead and put them in the chat, and our wonderful hosts are going to pass those questions along to us to answer live.
I can start with some questions that have already been asked in the chat. And some of them were answered in the comments, but it might be worth just elevating those. So one question was about the dates, how we decided on which dates to send the letters. And I might have misspoken at the beginning, so I want to just use this as an opportunity to clarify too. How did we choose November or October? Sorry. Please, someone clarify this so I don't give you misinformation. And you know, how did we choose the length of the window when we asked people to send out letters?
I can take this one. So this is something where we've been actively researching this and evolving our strategy over time. In the past, we tried to send letters as close to election day as possible, but no later, right? Because a letter that arrives after the election can't have any impact. So what we tried to do is time that sending date so letters would arrive right around election day. And the idea there is that you're minimizing what we call decay, right? When let's say that you were to send a letter about the November election to somebody now, that's a lot of time for that message to decay over time. The chances that they're going to remember your letter, much less save it, you know, maybe somebody will put it on their fridge for the next 6 months, but that would be very lucky. There's just too much time in there for that to sort of dissipate. Whereas if that letter arrives right when that person has the opportunity to vote, we think it's going to be the most impactful. But as we know over time, especially over the last few years, voting behavior has been changing. And so mail-in voting and early voting is becoming even more of a factor than it was previously. And we've also run some experimentation to investigate this question that found that either early letters are more effective or just as effective as letters sent late. And so overall, our thinking on this is shifting to say, okay, Well, maybe letters that arrive in the few weeks leading up to an election can actually be just as effective. What we also like about that is that it gives you some flexibility, right? As letter writers. So, if there's a day that it's more convenient for you to send your letters, you can do that. And we think that they're going to be just as effective if you send them October 1st as if you send them October 29th. So yeah, that's the story there. And yes, I'll just clarify what Catherine said. October 1st is the beginning of the mailing window this year, and October 29th is the end. If you're wondering why October 29th, it's 7 days before Election Day. And we think that that's the amount of buffer that we need to ensure that all the letters actually reach their recipients on or before Election Day.
Can I just add a follow-up, which is, have you guys done any testing on whether it's more impactful to send one letter to a person versus one every month or something like that?
We haven't done that sort of extended testing over time. We have tested sending multiple waves of letters, either that arrive around the same time or like a little bit staggered. And we somewhat surprisingly have not seen evidence that sending multiple letters is reliably more effective than sending one.
Yeah.
And I say surprising because I know other organizations have tested this with direct mail, for example, or other forms of voter contact, and find that each additional contact point does get you a little bit of marginal benefit. So it may just be a quirk of the places where we've happened to test this in the past. It may be that our data was not sufficiently clear, but that's what our research has shown to date.
Can I ask one more question? Sorry. I'm just curious because I have a stack of letters on my desk that I'm not opening. So do you track, is there a way to track like how long it takes someone to actually open it? Are there ways to make sure that people open the letter, especially if it's sent on October 29th?
Unfortunately, we don't have
Don't know, right?
that. Right. Yeah. It's an analog thing, this envelope. So if somebody opens it or not, we have no way of knowing that. What we do know, interesting, and this will be a new thing this year, that we're putting QR codes in letters. We've just started experimenting with this. And so we will be able to track if people are accessing those QR codes, which is,
Right.
Obviously a lot of people aren't going to necessarily scan the QR codes or go to the link, but it's sort of an indication of when people are looking at the letters.
All right, we have a lot of questions, so I'll read a few more. One question that just came in, I'm a little confused about the need to have a printer. Aren't we supposed to be writing these letters by hand in our own handwriting? Nia, maybe you can clarify kind of the utility of having a printed letter with handwritten elements.
Yeah. So Big Tent USA is doing this great thing where they will send you the pre-printed form letter directly. So if you requested letters through Big Tent USA, you will receive a packet of the form letter that then you write your customized message on directly. If you have requested your letters from Vote Forward, you download a PDF and then you want to print that and write your customized message on it. So it's a combination form letter and personalized message. And this is so that we can include accurate voting information to letter recipients. We have QR codes on our letters this year where people can find nonpartisan ballot guides as well as voter registration information. And also we think that this combination of handwritten and printed form letter gives our letters kind of a special edge because it seems legitimate and it also seems personal. So we think that that combination of the print and handwritten, it increases our effectiveness.
It also helps avoid some liability issues around making sure that the information we provide is super accurate. And we don't want to, the last thing we'd want to do is provide any misinformation to voters. Great question about some of the content, which maybe I will try to answer. We got a comment, some of the stories put in the chat had negative content around shootings or deaths or gun violence, high drug prices. How do we balance that with the goal of positive messaging? And I will start to answer this, and maybe Nia or Emily have additions. But I think the idea is we don't want to emphasize how like voting being hard. The positive messaging is really about the act of voting, and we want to make voting seem easy, accessible, and a great thing to do. The issues that motivate people can be serious, and they might be negative or positive, but kind of illustrating why an issue matters to you and why you're voting. And so the balance there is kind of, we never want to say your vote's going to be suppressed, or it's really hard to vote, or that sort of thing. We want to make sure that people feel like it's something that they can easily do, but also that the stakes are high. And sometimes the stakes being high include some stories that have a more serious valence to them. Any additions to that?
No, I think that's exactly right. When we say voting is a positive, or frame voting in a positive light, we look at behavioral change research for that information, and people want to participate in something that is fun and exciting, that's easy, and that everybody else is doing. So kind of framing voting as difficult or part of voter suppression can just make someone say, oh, well, I don't want to deal with that. I'm going to turn off from voting entirely, which is not what we want to do. But like you said, the issues that motivate voting from our real lives can be very effective in reaching people and their values and motivating them to action.
All right, we have a couple minutes left. We have a question about, can we ask the recipient to ask 5 other people to vote? And I wonder if maybe we've done kind of similar experiments, or if there's any info on that.
Yes, we have tested this. We did this in 2021 in Texas, what we called at the time a vote tripling ask. I know that now the vote tripling has become vote quintupling. I guess 5 is better than 3. If you have 20 friends, ask 20 friends to vote. I don't know. So that experiment was a bit inconclusive, although there was a little bit of evidence that the vote tripling letters were more effective at increasing turnout among their recipients. The tricky thing is that it's actually quite difficult to design an experiment to test how the tripling spreads through a voter's network, right? Because then you need to not just know who is that voter that you sent a letter to, but also who are the people that they may have asked, and how did they react? And we don't have the data collection apparatus to do that very well. So we can't offer you like a great research basis of our own for it. What I can say is that there's a lot of evidence from organizations that focus specifically on vote tripling that this is effective. And so definitely encourage you, if you want to put that ask in your letter. I think the important thing to emphasize is that that should be an addition, ideally, to the personal story, right? Because it's still important that the letter recipient is receiving a letter that feels specific and authentic and compelling, because you still want them to take action, right? So that's your chance to ask them to, become emotionally engaged and take action. And then once you've kind of got your foot in the door there, you can say, oh, and by the way, ask your other friends to vote too.
We've got 1 minute left, so I think I will wrap there and let Mary dismiss everyone.
It's like class. Well, thank you all. Thank you 3 for, educating us about Vote Forward, inspiring us to get more engaged and to write a lot of letters in the next several months. For people on the Zoom, keep writing the letters. And if you need more, please go to our website, Big Tent USA, to sign up for more letters. We have a bunch sitting there waiting for you, and would love to have you send them in October. And then the great news is, in May, after you've done your initial push with these letters, please come back to Big Tent, because we are going to host Vote Forward again, so we can celebrate and learn more and get more letters and keep moving to protect democracy. So that is, one way you can help going forward. The other way, of course, is to sign up for the Big Tent newsletter, which is really, really excellent. Add it to your sort of weekly, monthly reading lists. And follow us on social media and share our posts, share the information from all our partners. Vote Forward is obviously doing incredible work. We're so grateful for all the research and, you know, efforts you're doing to protect democracy, and we're delighted to partner with you. Thank you again.